The valley tried to erase her, until one cabin said number Maya had always felt the weight of the valley on her shoulders. From the moment she could remember, the people around her seemed to whisper about her, though she never did anything wrong. The valley, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests, looked beautiful from afar, but to Maya it felt like a cage. Every street, every corner, every familiar face carried judgment. She had learned early that nothing she did could escape the silent scrutiny of her neighbors. Her family had been part of the valley for generations, but their history was not spotless. Old stories and mistakes from years ago seemed to cling to her as if they had been passed down like a curse. Villagers would murmur behind their hands when she walked by, and sometimes she could feel eyes following her from darkened windows. At school, she was often left out of group activities. Even children, guided by the attitudes of their parents, kept their distance. Simple invitations that others took for granted never came her way. Maya learned to eat alone at lunch, to walk alone on quiet paths, and to sit quietly in classrooms without drawing attention. Despite the loneliness, Maya had a curious mind and a quiet strength. She loved to wander along the edges of the valley, where the forest began to climb the mountains. There, she felt a small sense of freedom. The trees seemed to embrace her with a silent understanding that no human had ever offered. She would sit for hours on fallen logs, sketching the wildflowers, listening to the birds, and imagining a life that wasn't filled with whispers and judgment. The forest became her refuge, a place where she could breathe without fear. But even the forest could not fully shield her from the valley's shadow. Rumors spread faster than the wind. She would hear them when she passed the bakery or the small market in the center of town. People would say things about her family, about her, things that were not true, but in the valley, truth mattered less than perception. She had learned to ignore most of it, but the sting never completely disappeared. Sometimes the loneliness would press down so hard that she felt invisible, erased from the life around her. Her parents tried to protect her as best they could. Her mother would hug her tightly in the evenings, whispering that the valley didn't define her, that she was stronger than the rumors. Her father, quiet and steady, would take her on long walks along the hills, teaching her about the plants and animals, reminding her that the world outside the valley was bigger than the small, judging minds around them. Yet no matter how much love she received at home, the valley's hostility was unavoidable. Every day was a delicate balance between staying safe and trying to be herself. School was particularly hard. Teachers, though kind in private, sometimes unconsciously reinforced the whispers and glances. Group projects were a minefield. Classmates would sometimes exclude her, leaving her with the smallest tasks or completely ignoring her ideas. She began to notice that even when she spoke with care, her words were twisted or dismissed. The isolation was not always loud. Often it was quiet, subtle, but relentless. It made her question whether she belonged anywhere at all. Yet Maya had a spark inside her, a refusal to be completely swallowed by the valley's shadow. She was clever and observant. She had learned to watch people's expressions, to read the shifts in tone, and to avoid confrontations that could escalate. At the same time, she cherished moments of kindness, however rare. A smile from a passing stranger, a nod of acknowledgement from a neighbor, these small gestures reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, even if it was scarce. One morning, as the mist rolled over the valley and the sun struggled to break through, Maya walked along the narrow path by the river. The water flowed quietly, its surface reflecting the gray sky and the distant mountains. Here she could think clearly, away from the judgmental eyes that seemed to follow her everywhere else. She ran her fingers through the cool water, watching the ripples spread. The river had no expectations, no prejudice. It accepted her just as she was, and for a moment she felt at peace. Still, the valley's pressure was relentless. That afternoon, as she returned from the river, she noticed that a few windows along the main street had shutters hastily closed. Whispers followed her like shadows. "There she is," someone muttered. A shopkeeper averted his eyes, pretending not to see her. The feeling of being watched, of being unwelcome, pressed against her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached home, her shoulders were slumped, her heart weary. That evening she sat by her bedroom window looking out at the valley below. The houses glowed with warm lights, families laughing and sharing stories, while she sat alone, a silent observer. A knot of frustration and sadness twisted inside her. She wondered if the valley would ever let her exist without judgment, if she would ever find a place where she could belong. The thought of leaving sometimes crossed her mind, but she didn't know where to go. The valley was all she had ever known, and leaving meant stepping into the unknown, with no guarantee of acceptance anywhere else. Maya's solitude was interrupted one evening when she noticed something unusual. On the far edge of the valley, where the forest thickened and the mountains rose steeply, there was an old cabin she had never paid attention to before. It was small, wooden, and looked as if it had stood there for decades, untouched by the valley's judgmental eyes. A soft light glowed faintly through one of its windows. Something about it called to her. It seemed different from the rest of the valley, a place that had not joined in the whispers, a place that existed quietly, apart from the rules and gossip of the community. The next day, curiosity drew her closer to the cabin. The path was narrow, overgrown with weeds and fallen branches. As she approached, she could hear the faint sound of someone moving inside. Hesitation battled with hope, but her desire for connection, even small, pushed her forward. She knocked gently on the wooden door. To her surprise, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with kind eyes. His name was Elias, and he smiled warmly as if he had been expecting her. There was no judgment in his gaze, no whispers, no shadows, just a simple acknowledgement of her presence. Elias invited her in, offering a cup of tea and a place to sit by the fire. For the first time in years, Maya felt a sense of safety, of being seen without being measured or judged. She told him small things about herself, her love for the forest, her sketches, the loneliness she felt in the valley. Elias listened patiently, never interrupting, never dismissing her feelings. In his company, the valley's shadows seemed to fade, if only slightly. That evening, as Maya left the cabin, she felt a spark of hope she had not felt in a long time. For the first time, she realized that perhaps there were places and people in the world who would not try to erase her. Perhaps she did not have to live entirely under the valley's heavy gaze. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Maya felt ready to take her first small steps toward reclaiming her life. The valley had tried to define her, to erase her existence with whispers, glances, and exclusion, but in that quiet corner at the edge of the trees, she had found a sign that she could resist. And so, with each passing day, Maya began to gather her courage. She walked a little taller, held her head a little higher, and allowed herself brief moments of happiness without guilt. The valley might still cast its shadow, but she had discovered a place that said no to its cruelty. And for the first time, Maya felt the possibility of belonging, not in the valley perhaps, but somewhere beyond judgment. Maya returned to the cabin the next morning, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The valley still loomed behind her, filled with its whispers and judging eyes, but the path to the cabin felt like a bridge to another world, a small place untouched by cruelty. The old wooden structure stood quietly among the trees, its roof slightly slanted, its walls weathered by time, yet solid and welcoming. Elias greeted her with a gentle nod and a warm smile, as if no one had the power to erase her there. "Good morning, Maya," he said. "I was wondering if you'd come today." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I wanted to see if this place was real," she admitted, stepping inside. The cabin smelled of wood, fire, and herbs. It was simple but cozy, with a small stove, a few shelves of books, and a table by the window that looked out into the forest. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across the floor. It felt like the outside world, harsh, cold, and judgmental, did not exist here. Elias gestured toward the table. "Sit. Let's have tea. You look like you could use it." As she poured the tea, Maya felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She had grown used to isolation, to being careful with every word and every movement. Trust did not come easily, but something about Elias, his calm presence and steady gaze, made her feel safe. She realized that she hadn't felt this way in a long time, maybe ever. Over the next few days, Maya began to spend more time at the cabin. She would walk the narrow forest paths, collecting herbs and kindling for the fire, and Elias would watch her quietly, offering guidance only when necessary. He taught her how to identify edible plants, how to start a fire without matches, and how to listen to the forest for signs of animals. These lessons were more than survival skills. They were lessons in patience, observation, and respect for life. Maya felt a growing sense of belonging in the cabin, a contrast to the valley where every step she took seemed measured and judged. Here, she could be herself without fear. She began keeping a small journal, writing down her thoughts and feelings. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream beyond the narrow limits the valley had set for her. She imagined a life where she could make choices freely, where her worth was not tied to the rumors or grudges of others. But as peaceful as the cabin was, the valley remained an ever-present threat. One afternoon, while Maya was gathering firewood near the edge of the forest, she heard voices. Two villagers had wandered farther than usual, their laughter and chatter carrying through the trees. Maya froze, unsure if they had seen her. She ducked behind a large oak, holding her breath as they passed. Their words were sharp, filled with mockery and disdain. "There she is," one of them said, "still hiding like she owns the place." Maya's heart sank. Even in her safe haven, the valley's shadow had found her. She realized that the more she tried to escape, the more people noticed her absence. Whispers of disapproval and attempts to shame her would follow her everywhere, like shadows that refused to be shaken off. When she returned to the cabin, Elias noticed her tension immediately. "Something troubles you," he said. They saw me," Maya admitted. "Even here they won't leave me alone." Elias nodded, his expression serious but calm. "The world will always try to push back against those who are different, Maya, but here you are safe, and with time you will learn to stand firm, to protect yourself without fear." Maya wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could finally find a place where she belonged. And slowly, she began to trust that the cabin, this quiet refuge, was more than just a building. It was a symbol, a reminder that even when the valley tried to erase her, there were places and people who refused to let her be forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and Maya's confidence began to grow. She started small projects around the cabin, sweeping the floor, fixing the old roof tiles, and tending a small garden Elias had started. She discovered a talent for nurturing plants, for coaxing life from the soil even in the harshest conditions. It gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling she had never experienced in the valley where her presence was always questioned. As she worked, Elias shared stories about his own life, about the years he had spent in solitude, about the times he had faced judgment and exclusion. Maya listened intently, feeling a kinship with him. He had not allowed the harshness of the world to diminish him, and she realized she could learn the same lesson. Strength was not only in surviving, but in refusing to let fear and judgment dictate one's life. One crisp morning, as Maya watered the garden, she noticed smoke rising from the valley. Curiosity mixed with anxiety, and she peered toward her home. A group of villagers had gathered near her family's house, their faces angry, their voices raised. They were talking about her, about how she had abandoned the valley by spending so much time at the cabin. The sight tightened her chest. It was as if they were trying to drag her back into the shadows, to remind her that the valley still held power over her life. Elias came up behind her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You see," he said gently, "the valley will always try to control you, but here you make the rules. You decide what your life is worth." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. For the first time, she truly understood that safety was not just about walls or doors. It was about standing firm in her own worth, about finding strength in places that nurtured her rather than trying to tear her down. Over the following days, Maya continued to grow closer to the cabin. She discovered old books hidden on shelves, diaries of people who had lived there long ago, stories of resilience and quiet courage. She read late into the night, absorbing their wisdom, imagining how they had faced their own trials. The cabin became more than a shelter. It became a classroom, a library, and a sanctuary for her mind and spirit. Despite the growing peace, Maya remained aware of the valley. She would often see villagers passing by the edge of the forest, their eyes scanning for her, their whispers carried by the wind. Sometimes she felt fear rising again, a reminder that the valley had not forgotten her. But the more time she spent in the cabin, learning, growing, and reconnecting with her own strengths, the less their presence could shake her. She began to understand that while she could not erase the valley, she could protect herself and create spaces where she was valued. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Maya sat by the cabin window, sipping tea. She looked out at the forest, the quiet river beyond, and the faint lights of the valley in the distance. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. The valley might try to erase her, to shape her life according to its narrow rules, but the cabin and Elia's guidance had given her a glimpse of something different, a life where she could exist without fear, a life she could shape herself. Maya knew the road ahead would not be easy. The valley's whispers would continue, and judgment would still follow her like a shadow. But she had found a place that refused to let her be erased. And that, she realized, was the beginning of a new journey, one where courage, resilience, and the small acts of care and kindness could outshine even the darkest shadows. For the first time, Maya felt a sense of possibility. She could face the valley with her head held high, knowing that she had a refuge, a mentor, and a growing strength within herself. The cabin had said no to erasure, and in that refusal, Maya discovered that she could also say no to fear, to judgment, and to the loneliness that had haunted her for so long. Maya had begun to settle into a quiet rhythm at the cabin. Each morning she rose with the sun, the golden light spilling through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She would stretch, breathe deeply, and step outside to greet the crisp mountain air. The forest seemed alive in a way that the valley never was, full of sounds and movements that spoke of freedom and life. Birds chirped from the treetops, the river gurgled softly, and the scent of pine filled her senses. Here, for the first time, Maya felt that she belonged somewhere, not entirely safe from the world, but in a place that did not judge her. Elias became more than just a mentor. He became a teacher in the truest sense. He encouraged Maya to explore the skills that would allow her to survive, thrive, and protect herself. "The world is not always kind," he told her one morning as they collected firewood near the edge of the forest. "Some people will try to erase you because they do not understand you. That does not mean you have to disappear. You can stand your ground if you learn to be strong and patient." Maya nodded, taking in every word. She had never thought about strength in this way before. To her, it had always seemed like courage meant confronting danger head-on. Now she was beginning to understand that true strength could be quiet, thoughtful, and careful. It was about preparation, awareness, and knowing when to act. Under Elia's guidance, she learned to track animals, recognize the signs of the forest, and build small shelters for safety. She practiced making fire without matches, learning to rub sticks together until sparks ignited dry leaves. At first, it was frustrating. Sparks would fizzle out, flames would die before they could grow, and she would feel herself faltering. But Elias never criticized her. Instead, he showed patience, demonstrating the motions again and again, offering gentle advice and celebrating small successes. Slowly, Maya began to see that mistakes were not failures, they were lessons. As she worked, she felt her confidence growing. Tasks that once seemed impossible became challenges she could meet with patience and determination. Even the forest, which had once felt mysterious and intimidating, now seemed like an ally. She could read the movements of animals, understand the shifts in the wind, and sense changes in the weather. It was as if the world beyond the valley had opened its arms to her, offering guidance in its own quiet way. But as Maya grew stronger, the valley's shadow loomed closer. Rumors had spread quickly about her refuge, and whispers reached even the farthest corners of the community. One afternoon, as she returned from gathering herbs, she noticed footprints along the forest path, too many to be just animals. Panic rose in her chest. She froze, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The footsteps drew closer, and she realized with a sinking feeling that some villagers had come into the forest looking for her. Elias appeared beside her, calm and steady. "They are curious," he said, "or maybe angry. Either way, we must be careful. This is your sanctuary, Maya, and we will protect it together." Maya's heart pounded, but she trusted Elias. He taught her to move quietly, to observe without being seen, and to choose paths that gave them advantage. Together, they watched from the shadows as the villagers passed, muttering and searching, their eyes scanning the trees. The encounter ended without confrontation, but it left Maya aware of the persistent threat the valley posed. She realized that safety was not guaranteed by walls or distance. It was created by awareness, strategy, and courage. Over the following days, Maya began to train more seriously. Elias showed her how to prepare for emergencies, how to move silently, and how to use the forest to her advantage. She learned to set simple traps, not to harm anyone but to warn her if someone approached. She practiced carrying supplies, rationing food, and staying alert for sudden changes in her surroundings. Each exercise was both physical and mental, teaching her patience, focus, and confidence. Through it all, Maya discovered an inner strength she had never known. The valley had tried to erase her with whispers and judgment, but now, in the quiet of the forest and the guidance of the cabin, she realized that she could resist. Her fears had not disappeared, but they no longer controlled her. She had learned to face uncertainty with careful steps and to find power in knowledge and preparation. The bond between Maya and Elias deepened as well. He shared stories of his youth, of times he had faced judgment and exclusion, and how he had found ways to endure. He spoke of courage not as the absence of fear, but as the ability to act despite it. Maya absorbed every word, feeling that the lessons extended beyond survival. They were lessons for life. She began to see the cabin not just as a refuge, but as a place where she could grow into her full potential. One morning, while practicing moving silently through the forest, Maya stumbled upon a small clearing she had never seen before. Sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating a patch of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. She felt a sudden sense of calm and possibility. This was not just a place to hide. It was a place to thrive, to learn, and to prepare for whatever the valley might throw at her next. She sat among the flowers, feeling the sunlight on her face, and realized that the cabin and the forest had given her something priceless: hope. But even as Maya grew stronger, the valley continued to press. One evening, a group of villagers appeared at the edge of the forest, their voices carrying through the trees. They demanded to know where she had gone, their words sharp with accusation. Maya's first instinct was fear, but she remembered Elias' lessons. She remained calm, moving silently to observe without revealing herself. The villagers could not find her, but their presence reminded her that the valley's judgment was relentless. That night, Maya and Elias discussed what had happened. "They will not stop," Elias said. "And you will need to be ready, not with anger but with awareness and courage." Maya nodded, feeling a mixture of determination and nervousness. She understood that the valley would never fully accept her, and that she could no longer rely on avoidance alone. She needed to be prepared, to protect her sanctuary, and to grow stronger each day. The following weeks were filled with both routine and training. Maya tended the garden, collected firewood, and practiced survival skills under Elia's guidance. She also spent time reading old books, learning about nature, resilience, and human courage. Each day, she felt her confidence grow, her fears diminish, and her sense of purpose strengthen. The valley's whispers became distant echoes compared to the life she was building at the cabin. Maya began to understand that strength was not just about physical skill. It was about mental resilience, strategic thinking, and emotional endurance. She learned to anticipate challenges, to stay calm under pressure, and to find creative solutions to problems. The cabin was no longer just a safe place. It was a school, a training ground, and a sanctuary for her mind and spirit. One afternoon, as she practiced tracking animals in the forest, Maya realized how much she had changed. The girl who once walked through the valley weighed down by whispers was now alert, confident, and capable. She could move quietly, read the forest, and anticipate danger. She had learned patience, resilience, and self-reliance. And perhaps most importantly, she had discovered that even when the valley tried to erase her, she had the power to resist. By the end of part 3, Maya's life had transformed. She was no longer just a victim of whispers and judgment. She was a young woman learning to stand firm, protect herself, and claim her space in the world. The cabin had given her skills, confidence, and hope. The valley might still loom, but Maya now understood that strength was not about waiting for acceptance. It was about creating it for herself. The valley had grown restless. Rumors about Maya and her refuge in the cabin spread like wildfire, reaching ears that were eager to enforce judgment. Whispers became complaints, complaints became threats, and threats hovered over her like dark clouds ready to burst. For weeks, she had felt the weight of these rumors, but now, the valley seemed to be preparing for action. The villagers were no longer content to leave her in peace. They wanted to remind her that they still had control. One afternoon, while Maya and Elias worked in the garden, a group of villagers appeared at the edge of the forest. They were loud, their voices carrying anger and accusation. "We know you're hiding someone here," one of them shouted. "You cannot keep her in the forest like this." Maya's heart raced. The garden, once a place of calm and growth, suddenly felt fragile and exposed. She looked at Elias, who remained calm, his eyes steady. "Remember," he said quietly, "do not respond with fear or anger. Observe, plan, and act only if necessary." Maya nodded, swallowing her rising panic. She remembered everything she had learned in the past weeks: how to move silently, how to stay aware, and how to protect herself without confrontation. Together, she and Elias retreated into the denser part of the forest, leaving the villagers shouting and searching near the cabin. It was frustrating to see their anger, but Maya reminded herself that the cabin was her sanctuary, and she had already survived more than she had thought possible. The villagers eventually left, but the message was clear: they would not stop. Each day, the pressure increased. Supplies near the cabin were disturbed, messages were left on the trees, and distant shouts reminded Maya that the valley's reach extended even into the forest. She realized that the valley wanted to erase her not just with whispers, but with fear, isolation, and intimidation. Elias knew that it was time to prepare for more serious challenges. He began teaching Maya techniques for maintaining safety under pressure. She learned how to set warning signs along paths, so she would know if anyone approached. She practiced staying still and silent for long periods, observing without being seen. Elias explained that preparation was not about confrontation, it was about readiness and confidence. When they see that you are calm, alert, and prepared, their power over you begins to fade, he said. Maya threw herself into the training, her mind and body growing stronger with each passing day. She built small barriers, prepared emergency supplies, and mapped the forest around the cabin so she would always know possible routes and hiding places. She learned to ration food and water, ensuring she could survive days alone if necessary. Even when fear crept in, she remembered Elias' words. Courage was not the absence of fear, but action despite it. The valley's attacks escalated further. One morning, Maya found her small garden trampled, some of the plants destroyed. The sight filled her with a mix of anger and sadness. This garden had been a symbol of life, growth, and hope, and now it was damaged. But she refused to give in to despair. She and Elias worked together to repair the damage, replanting what they could and strengthening their defenses. Every act of restoration became a declaration. She would not be erased. That evening, Elias spoke seriously. They will try to test you in different ways, not just through words. It is important to remember that the strength we build here, your skills, your patience, your courage, will guide you through whatever comes next. They cannot take that from you unless you let them. Maya nodded, feeling a growing sense of resolve. She understood that the valley's attacks were not just external, they were designed to shake her confidence and break her spirit. But she had learned to protect both her body and her mind. She could face fear and uncertainty with patience, intelligence, and calm determination. Over the next few days, Maya began exploring further into the forest. She moved with careful confidence, testing her skills and observing the natural world around her. Each tree, river bend, and rocky slope became familiar territory. She learned to move silently, to notice small signs of movement, and to predict the paths of animals and people alike. The forest was no longer just a refuge. It had become a place of empowerment where she could practice resilience and strategy. Despite her growing strength, the valley's shadow continued to press. One afternoon, she noticed tracks in the mud near the cabin, fresh footprints, too large to belong to any animal she knew. Anxiety tightened her chest. Elias noticed her hesitation and gently guided her through a series of exercises. Together, they planned how to respond if the villagers returned, using observation, escape routes, and warning signals. Maya felt a strange mix of fear and confidence. She was afraid of what could happen, but she knew she had the skills to protect herself and her sanctuary. The valley's attempts to intimidate her were relentless. Messages carved into trees, items moved or hidden, and occasional confrontations at a distance kept her on edge. But Maya noticed something else. With every challenge, she grew stronger, more confident, and more alert. Where the valley had hoped to erase her, it had instead forged resilience and self-reliance. Every small victory, repairing her garden, moving undetected through the forest, preparing emergency supplies, was a step toward independence and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Maya reflected on her journey. She had come to the cabin as a girl burdened by whispers and judgment, uncertain of her place in the world. Now she was learning to stand firm, to protect herself, and to find strength in her own abilities. She realized that the cabin had given her more than safety. It had given her the tools to resist erasure and reclaim her life. But the valley was not finished. One night, a sudden commotion outside the cabin shook Maya from sleep. Voices, shouting and angry, echoed through the forest. She peeked through the window and saw torches flickering near the edge of the trees. The villagers were back, more determined than ever. Fear surged, but this time it did not control her. She remembered Elias' lessons: stay calm, observe, and respond with knowledge and strategy. Maya and Elias moved quietly, checking their emergency preparations. Warning signs were in place, escape routes mapped and supplies ready. They watched as the villagers approached, their anger palpable, but the cabin with its quiet strength held firm. The villagers shouted, demanding that Maya come out, trying to intimidate her with noise and presence. But she remained calm, using the forest and her preparations to stay safe. Hours passed, and eventually the villagers left, frustrated by their inability to find her. Maya felt a surge of triumph mixed with exhaustion. She realized that the valley's attempts to erase her had failed, not because the world had changed, but because she had. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. The cabin, her refuge, had become a symbol of resilience, a place where courage was forged and fear could be faced and overcome. In the following days, Maya continued to strengthen both her skills and her spirit. She rebuilt her garden, expanded her knowledge of the forest, and practiced remaining calm and alert in all situations. She also began to reflect on the valley itself, not as a place of judgment, but as a challenge that she had faced and survived. Each act of preparation, observation, and quiet resistance became a declaration. She would not be erased. By the end of Part 4, Maya had transformed. The valley had struck with threats, intimidation, and attempts to isolate her, but she had responded with courage, strategy, and perseverance. The cabin had protected her, but more importantly, it had taught her that her strength came from within. She was no longer a victim of whispers and judgment. She was a young woman capable of standing firm, facing fear, and claiming her place in the world. The stage was set for the final chapter. Maya had survived the valley's attacks, learned to protect herself, and grown stronger than she had ever imagined. What remained was the moment of truth, whether the valley would finally accept her, or whether she would claim her freedom on her own terms. Either way, Maya had discovered that no one, not the valley, not its whispers, not its judgment, could erase her spirit. The valley had tried everything. Its whispers, its judgment, its threats, they had all come to test her. And yet here she was, standing at the edge of the forest, looking at the small cabin that had become her sanctuary. The sun was rising over the mountains, spilling golden light across the trees, and for the first time in her life, Maya felt truly unafraid. She had survived the valley's attempts to erase her, and now she would reclaim her life on her own terms. The previous night had been tense. A group of villagers had returned, more determined than ever to find her. They had shouted, shaken the forest with their anger, and left messages meant to scare her. But Maya had stayed calm. She had used every skill Elias had taught her, moving quietly, observing carefully, and staying ready without panicking. By the time they had left, frustrated and empty-handed, she realized that their power over her was gone. Their anger, their judgment, could no longer control her. Elias joined her outside the cabin, his eyes gentle but proud. "You see, Maya," he said, "they can try all they want, but they cannot erase what you have built here. Your courage, your skill, your heart, these cannot be touched." Maya smiled, a lightness in her chest she had never known. "I feel free," she whispered. "Even if they still judge, I don't feel afraid anymore." Elias nodded. "That is true freedom, not the absence of danger, but the strength to face it and remain yourself." In the days that followed, Maya took steps to strengthen her presence in the forest even further. She repaired the cabin, expanded her garden, and improved her knowledge of the surrounding area. Every corner of the cabin and forest became familiar to her, a space where she could live with confidence. She practiced daily routines, ensuring that she could handle emergencies, navigate quickly, and remain alert. Each act was a reminder that she belonged here, that she could not be erased. Word of her resilience began to reach others in the valley, not through whispers, but through small acts of observation. Some villagers noticed that despite the rumors and threats, Maya was thriving. Her garden was flourishing, her cabin stood strong, and she moved through the forest with quiet confidence. Slowly, respect began to replace suspicion, Curiosity replaced judgment. Some villagers began to leave small gifts of food or supplies near the edge of the forest, hesitant but acknowledging that she was not weak or frightened. Maya felt a mix of surprise and cautious optimism. The valley had tried to erase her, but here was evidence that change was possible. People could shift their views, even if slowly, and she could influence them simply by living her truth. Her confidence grew with each passing day, her fear replaced by determination and purpose. One afternoon, a young girl from the village approached the edge of the forest. She carried a small basket of berries and watched Maya quietly from a distance. Maya noticed her and smiled warmly. The girl hesitated, then took a few careful steps closer. I wanted to help," the girl said softly, her voice almost drowned by the wind. "I've seen how hard it's been for you. I wanted to bring you these." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said gently, accepting the berries. "It means a lot." The girl smiled, relief and admiration in her eyes. "You're really brave," she whispered. "I wish I could be like you." Maya realized in that moment that her strength was not just for her own survival. It was a light that others could follow, a symbol of hope and resilience. She had faced the valley's judgment, the whispers and the threats, and she had not been erased. Now she could show others that courage and persistence could create change, even in a place that seemed small and suffocating. As the days passed, more villagers began to leave small signs of acknowledgement near the forest. Some were hesitant, unsure, but Maya noticed the pattern. The valley was beginning to see her differently, not as someone to erase, but as someone who belonged, someone who could not be ignored. And yet, Maya knew that true acceptance would take time. She did not expect everyone to change overnight, but she had learned that her own worth did not depend on their approval. One crisp morning, Maya and Elias stood together at the edge of the forest, looking out over the valley below. The valley, once a place of whispers and judgment, seemed quieter now. The sun illuminated the rooftops and winding paths, casting long shadows across the fields. Maya felt a sense of triumph, not over the people of the valley, but over the fear and doubt that had once controlled her. "I never thought I could feel like this," Maya said softly. "Like I belong, and like I am strong enough to stay myself no matter what they do." Elias smiled. "You have always had that strength, Maya. The cabin and the forest just helped you see it. Now you carry it with you wherever you go." Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Elias, but for the journey she had taken. The valley had tried to erase her with whispers, exclusion, and fear, but she had survived, grown, and thrived. She realized that life would continue to bring challenges, but she now had the courage and wisdom to face them. She would no longer let fear dictate her life. In the weeks that followed, Maya became a quiet leader in her own way. She shared knowledge with those who sought it, helped younger villagers understand the forest and the value of patience and resilience, and continued to thrive in her sanctuary. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the power of standing firm against adversity. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Maya walked to the edge of the cabin and looked out over the valley. She felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The valley had tried to erase her, but she had not only survived, it had strengthened her, taught her, and helped her discover her true self. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel complete. She had courage, skills, and knowledge. She had allies like Elias, and she had the forest and cabin that stood firm beside her. Most importantly, she had discovered that her worth was not determined by others' judgment, but by her own strength and determination. As night fell, Maya lit a small fire outside the cabin. The flames danced in the darkness, reflecting in her eyes. She smiled softly, knowing that the journey had been hard, but the lessons were invaluable. The valley might always exist, but she had discovered a place, a community, and a sense of self that could never be erased. She felt ready for anything, confident that she could face challenges with courage, patience, and wisdom. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sounds of the valley below. Maya listened quietly and realized that their whispers no longer frightened her. She was no longer the girl who had walked alone, burdened by judgment. She was a young woman who had faced fear, stood firm, and claimed her place in the world. The valley might still exist, but she had found her strength, her refuge, and her voice. She would never be erased again. As she turned back toward the cabin, Elias followed, a gentle smile on his face. "The valley tried to erase you," he said, "but you showed them that you are unbreakable. This is just the beginning, Maya. There is a life beyond fear, and you are ready for it." Maya nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep within her. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with fear, doubt, and the constant shadow of judgment. But now she had emerged stronger, braver, and unafraid. She had reclaimed her life, her freedom, and her dignity. And as she stepped into the cabin, the warmth of the fire and the quiet strength of her sanctuary wrapped around her like a promise. No matter what the valley tried, she could never be erased.